Hello everyone and welcome to our YouTube channel Kantian Project. My name is Sebastián de la Peña Ruiz. I am a PhD student on theoretical physics and I began this project with my colleagues to explain, promote the use of presuppositional philosophy among the scientific community, especially among physicists and mathematicians and other scientists. The term presuppositional philosophy, it's not a very common term in academia, so it's completely normal if you're not familiar with it or if you don't know what it means. We will explain that in a moment. That's precisely why this video is here. This video is the first video in a series of videos, which will be the course on presuppositional philosophy, the course on the principles and the limits of presuppositional philosophy. And here we will just briefly comment on what does presuppositional philosophy mean, what is going to be the scope of this course. Before we begin, I would like to emphasize, as probably you know already, that English is not my mother tongue. I'm not a native English speaker, so very likely I will make many mistakes, not only my pronunciation, but also in the grammar of my speech. So I would like to excuse myself in advance, and please you can write down in the comments any of the mistakes that is frequently done so that we can correct it as soon as possible, and then we can at least convey the information, convey the message clearly despite this small subtlety. Now let us begin our explanation of, or let us begin to answer the question, what is presuppositional philosophy? Okay, the definition of presuppositional philosophy is going to be the science that studies the conditions of possibility for the cognition of objects. That is, the science that studies the necessary epistemic presuppositions required for such cognition, required for the cognition of objects. This definition is very long. It contains many technical terms. Don't worry, we will see many of these terms as we advance in the course. We have used the phrase cognition of objects, epistemic presuppositions. Also, many of you might be wondering, okay, what does this have to do with philosophy in the first place? Probably you think that philosophy is about the meaning of life, or it's about making moral decisions. We will explain this in a moment, but to do so, let us comment briefly on what are the etymological origins of the word philosophy. The word philosophy originates from ancient Greek, from philosophia, which is a compound word of philos, meaning loving or to be fond of, and sophia, meaning wisdom. So the compound word philosophia literally means love or wisdom, or be fond of wisdom. And it's not surprising to anyone that the kind of wisdom that the ancient Greek philosophers might be thinking on is mathematics, it's geometry. For them, geometry, and even nowadays, the paradigmatic example of a science which provides necessary knowledge, necessary cognition, is mathematics. So, even though mathematics is going to play a fundamental role in our system of presuppositional philosophy as well, we have to think, or at least the way we see philosophy is, again, this astonishment of the knowledge, of the cognition that we acquire. We're astonished by this cognition and we would like to understand the origin. Why is it that this cognition is true? Why is it that we accept this piece of knowledge as true? So, following this spirit of the word philosophy, it's not surprising that we would like to understand the necessary presuppositions of knowledge, the necessary presuppositions for the cognition of objects, which is the definition of presuppositional philosophy. Now, this word presupposition, what does it mean? Let us discuss quickly, what does presupposition mean? A presupposition is an implicit premise or an implicit assumption that must be accepted in order for some other element to be true or to have any meaning. It's not an absolute truth. It's not an absolute truth. It's not an absolute premise. It's an element that we need to assume to be true, that we implicitly are assuming it to be true or to be there in order for some other, in our case, cognition to be true or to have any meaning. It's cognition what's going to tell us which are the epistemic presuppositions, which are the nosiological presuppositions that we need to assume for science or for cognition to be true. Let me give you an example. Imagine we have the judgment, the apple fell down the tree. Well, this judgment is a judgment about certain objects out there in experience, and these objects, of course, this judgment is going to be a cognition of objects. And what are the presuppositions that we need to take for granted if we say that this cognition is true, or we say that this is a possible cognition? Well, we need to understand what the conceptions involved in this judgment are. We need to understand what apple is, we need to understand what a tree is, and we need to understand what falling means. Also, we need space and time for the apple to move. If there is no space and time, then what does falling mean? What does falling down mean in the first place? We need to define this notion of falling down. We also need notions like object, like motion. All of this needs to be presupposed in order for the judgment, the apple fell down the tree, to even make sense. Not even to be true, but to make sense in the first place. And even though for many of you this might sound very trivial, we also need the subject-predicate logical structure to form the judgment, the apple fell down the tree. If we want the apple to be subject and falling down the tree to be its predicate, we need this relationship of predication to be presupposed in the logical structure of the judgment. Again, all of these presuppositions are just an example for this specific case. But what we're looking for in presuppositional philosophy, it's not any kind of presupposition. What we're looking for are the necessary presuppositions for the cognition of objects. We want the necessary presuppositions for knowledge to take place, which means that we need to create a hierarchy of presuppositions. We will take every presupposition that we can and we will put it in a hierarchy with other presuppositions, which means that we will classify them according to whether they are necessary for knowledge or they're unnecessary for knowledge, whether they're necessary or unnecessary for the cognition of objects to take place. Let us provide some obvious examples of unnecessary presuppositions for the cognition of objects. We don't need a theory of quantum gravity for knowledge or for cognition of objects to take place. For sure, we don't have this theory now, so it would be absurd if we needed this theory for science to take place, if we needed quantum gravity for cognition to take place in the first place. Since we don't have it at the moment, then we wouldn't have any cognition, provided that this was a necessary condition for knowledge, which of course it is not. We also don't need a theory for the meaning of life to speak about knowledge, to speak about cognition. This is also an unnecessary presupposition for knowledge. Yes, it might be good to have a theory for the meaning of life in order to know how to employ science properly, or how to employ the results of science in a proper way or in a moral way. But this is not going to be part of the necessary presuppositions for science. Also, proficiency in first order logic, second order logic, Spanish, French, Chinese, English, any specific language that you can imagine, it's not going to be a necessary presupposition for the cognition of objects. Language itself, it's not a necessary presupposition for the cognition of objects. It might be a useful tool to communicate, to express certain cognitions, to express judgments, thoughts. But when we speak about judgments, when we speak about cognition, about knowledge, we're not talking about the way we are expressing these judgments in language. We're talking about the abstract representation. We're talking about the abstract element, the nosiological element, the epistemic element, which is what we need to take for granted for cognition to take place. So again, we distinguish what is just a way of communicating science, a way of communicating knowledge from knowledge itself. Finally, we don't need to know about cognitive psychology, we don't need to know about neuroscience, we don't need to know about any of these specific branches of either biology or psychology, because these are not necessary presuppositions for science. We can do science, and these actually are specific sciences. So these are cognitions of objects. We reach these cognitions, we acquire these cognitions by using the necessary presuppositions, but they themselves are not necessary presuppositions for the cognition of objects. Again, these were just examples of presuppositions that might be necessary for other things, but not for cognition of objects to take place. Some necessary presuppositions that we will deduce, or we will discover, we will reveal over the next series of videos are the flow of time, the use of numbers and quantities, causal relations, existence of objects in the world, the fact that we can talk about ontology, about metaphysics of objects that exist and interact and have causal interactions among each other. This is going to be quite important as we elaborate our system of presuppositional philosophy, but you see already that we emphasize a lot the hierarchy of presuppositions. Not every presupposition is going to have the same value, and here we're looking for the necessary presuppositions, the necessary conditions for the cognition of objects to take place, to be acquired. Now, another way to phrase or to name presuppositional philosophy is going to be Nosiology. We can employ the word Nosiology, which again is a compound word made up of gnosis, which means cognition, knowledge, and logia, which is usually study of, discourse, investigation of. So since we're looking for the necessary conditions, the necessary presuppositions for the cognition of objects, I think Nosiology is a good synonym for presuppositional philosophy. And here cognition of objects, as we have said before, is going to be just the technical term for knowledge of wisdom. Since these are very vague and obscure notions, we will employ cognition of objects, and we will discuss later exactly what do we mean by cognition of objects. And the way we're going to work in this doctrine, in this science of presuppositional philosophy, is by looking for the nosiological elements, these epistemic presuppositions, necessary epistemic presuppositions, or necessary conditions for the cognition of objects. We're going to call them the nosiological elements. And the way we're going to look for these nosiological elements is by doing nosiological arguments. Nosiological arguments work with this following structure. We say X is a necessary presupposition for Y, then we say Y is a cognition, and if we have this major premise and this minor premise, then we obviously see that X is going to be a necessary condition for the cognition Y, which means that X is going to be a nosiological element. And this is what we're going to look for. We're going to look for nosiological elements in all our cognition. We're going to look for the basis, the foundations, the basis of our cognition in order to work out our system of presuppositional philosophy. So this is just the schematic picture of how will many of the arguments employed to look for these nosiological elements will take place. But the method that we're actually going to employ is going to be very similar to mathematics. We're going to employ a deductive method. Deductive methods, they're famous because you begin with a set of premises, which you call axioms, and then you derive propositions and theorems from them. The way we're going to employ this semantic method is, first, we're going to have what we call the nosiological atoms. These nosiological atoms are going to be the semantic pieces of our model. And from these nosiological atoms, we're going to build definitions and what we call nosiological molecules. Nosiological molecules are going to be conceptions that we define out of the nosiological atoms. And then once we have these nosiological atoms and nosiological molecules, then we can speak about axioms. We're going to speak about nosiological axioms, which are going to be the premises of our reasonings. And with these nosiological axioms, we're going to derive propositions and theorems, which, as you can imagine already, these axioms and these theorems are not going to be exactly the same as the axioms and theorems of mathematics. That's why I added this adjective nosiological to them, nosiological axioms or nosiological theorems, because they are not going to be exactly the same as the theorems and the axioms that we find in mathematics. We're talking here about presuppositional philosophy, we're talking here about epistemic presuppositions, we're talking here about Nosiology, about the conditions for cognition. And one very important comment that I should add here is that, as in every deductive model, the important thing here is not to trust what we say. The value of what we say or what we say is true insofar as it can be derived from the axioms, as long as you understand what do we mean, what does each judgment that we say means, then you can judge whether what we say is right or wrong. Here there is no absolute truth. This model is far from being absolute truth. Our model is true insofar as cognition, or insofar as we take cognition to be true, and insofar as we correctly found a nosiological element for a certain piece of cognition. So we are going to explain what we call the model, the abstract theory with the logical elements. This is what we would like to explain to you, but to explain this model, we need to employ a system. We need to employ a system of words, a system of terms, a system of statements. We will employ many technical terms that many of you will find obscure at the beginning. Even many of you will find ambiguous. You might think, okay, this term actually means something different in this other context. But bear in mind that the important thing here is not to remember the statements that we say. It's not to remember the words that we used. The important thing here is to understand the judgment. It's to understand the reasonings. It's to understand the abstract model, not the specific way in which we express the model. You should all rebuild the model yourselves with your own words, with the words you're familiar with the words you're comfortable with, so that you can understand what it means, so that you can employ these tools yourself in your respective area of research. That's the importance of this course. It's not to remember what we say by heart. It's not to just take the words we use and that's it. Of course, the words we're going to use, the system we're going to use is going to be very useful to do these derivations, to express the axioms, but you need to understand what the axioms mean to actually prove the theorems. Otherwise, it's not worth to follow this kind of course. Okay, so once that is said, I would like to briefly comment on other resources that you can also look for in case you're interested in presuppositional philosophy. These videos will take a lot of time. It probably will take many months until I publish all the videos. So in the meantime, if you're interested, you can look for these two works of philosophy, which we selected for you so that you can learn by yourself about these topics of presuppositional philosophy and about Nosiology. And the major recommendation that we would like to provide you, even though we're not 100% in agreement with it, is the Kritik der reinen Vernunft, Critique of Pure Reason, which is the major work of Immanuel Kant. And there you can find most of the things we will discuss in this series of videos. It's expressed substantially different than we will express it here, but still I think it's a worth trying work if you're interested in this topic. And you will also see a different system of working out presuppositional philosophy. The way Kant employs terms, it's very different. He doesn't even talk about presuppositional philosophy. He talks about transcendental philosophy. Even the nosiological argument that I commented before, he calls it transcendental argument, and actually that's the way it's seen by most of the people in academia. They speak about transcendental argument, transcendental philosophy, transcendental element. We decided to remove this word because it's very obscure, it confuses people, and scientists probably are not very comfortable with this word. So we now are going to talk about presuppositional philosophy, nosiological argument, etc., etc. If you're going to read this work in English, this work is originally in German, but if you're going to read it in English, we highly recommend the translation by Werner Pluha, because it's the translation that's most faithful to many of the technical terms that appear in this work. And this is very important, because if you don't translate the technical terms properly, then many of the theorems don't really work. The second recommendation we would like to provide, even though this is a smaller work, it doesn't contain as much content related to what we're doing, but anyway, it's the second most similar work that we can find out there is the Logisch-philosophische Abhandlung. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Ludwig Wittgenstein. And specifically, we recommend the translation by Charles K. Ogden, if you read it in English, because this is a translation that Wittgenstein himself corrected and checked. So yeah, this would be basically the two major works that we would recommend if you are interested in this topic, besides what we're going to explain to you in this course. We don't agree 100% with none of these authors, but still I think it's worth trying if you want to at least see a different way of explaining these topics. And of course, in this YouTube channel, we have our own Discord server where you're all welcome to join. We have a community in Discord where we discuss about different topics from philosophy of science, epistemology, metaphysics. We try to build a healthy community, and now we're even expanding the set of languages that is spoken in this community. We would like to have a polyglot community and speak in Spanish, English, French, Chinese, German, as many languages as possible. So if you're willing to meet new people from different countries or people that speak different languages, you are very welcome to join. And also we are the founders of these projects, we are also part of this Discord server. So we will be there in case you have any question, and we can personally answer the question in any of the written chats or in any of the voice channels if you're interested. Okay, so let me finish by stating some concluding remarks. We said that presuppositional philosophy is a nosiological model. It's a model for the cognition of objects. It's a model about how do we reach the cognition of objects that allows us to study the foundations of knowledge in a rigorous way. Presuppositional philosophy, we can see it as the roots or the trunk of science and philosophy of science. And this is basically what we call the analogy of the tree. So you can imagine knowledge, you can imagine science as a tree, for example, like this. So we have here the roots, we have the trunk, we have the branches, and then up here we have the leaves. So the roots and the trunk, we can say this is presuppositional philosophy. Suppositional. And the branches here are the philosophy of the sciences. These are philosophy of science, and the leaves is science itself. So you see that the roots and the trunks of the roots and the trunk of science, of knowledge, is where presuppositional philosophy is based. It's the foundations of knowledge. It's the foundational elements of any other piece of knowledge. And then the different branches which are going to hold the leaves which are the sciences themselves, are going to be philosophy of science, are going to be philosophy of mathematics, are going to be philosophy of physics, they're going to be philosophy of biology, philosophy of psychology, etc., etc. So, with this in mind, and with the quick and brief introduction to presuppositional philosophy that we provided in this video, I would like to ask you to have fun. Please enjoy this series of videos. Ask any question in the comments down below. And if you want to join the Discord server, you will find the link in the description below as well. So, thank you very much for your attention, and see you in the next video. Bye.